These four things: fear, distrust, need to control, and need for things to be perfect. These are the things that get in the way of becoming good leaders and good delegators.
How do we grow beyond the limits of our own capability, right? How do we exist in a system? How do we lead that system? How do we create the vision when it requires so much more than our own effort? And today's conversation is about that. It's about being that vulnerable leader, getting people to really support us in taking on the projects, the tasks that we need to delegate and hand off. It's the way that we scale our energy and time. And this guest is someone that has recently written the book on it. How do you really effectively delegate? And we're going to really be talking a lot about mindset, right? Because it's not more tools and tactics. We've heard all these things of, learn these tricks and tools and use this app. None of that stuff. It's all about the mindset. What's really stopping us from effectively trusting other people, letting go, and allowing them to achieve those things. Hope you enjoy the show. All right. Hey, everybody. I'm here with a renowned serial entrepreneur and the co-founder and co-CEO of Apprentice, which is a revolutionary platform designed to bridge the gap between ambitious entrepreneurs and top college talent. He's also a New York Times best-selling author. He's penned several books, including Likeable Social Media, Likeable Business, The Art of People, and most recently, Get Over Yourself. And I'm envious. He's had an 8-figure exit from his prior company, Likeable Media. He's also an incredible global keynote speaker. I've seen him speak myself. So please welcome Dave Kerpen. Thank you for being here, Dave. So
Thanks for having me, Nick. Great to see you, man.
Yeah, and it's like we obviously go way back. I think like the story that we often start on is that I flew you and your wife Carrie to Block Island for a special night. I took one of my friends. We walked on the beach, and I think you guys had was it your anniversary? I think
it was an anniversary, and to this day, Nick, at least several years later, that was the best. I can say that's the best date of my life, so thank you again. I'm forever grateful for you for what ended up making me look like I feel like a rock star as a husband. Nothing says committed to a solid date night than a private plane to an island, and we had a wonderful time. I haven't been back to Block Island since too. It's what a cool spot that is.
Yeah, that was really fun. That was definitely one of the highlights of my experiences in flying. Is just I loved exposing my friends to aviation, and I just can't think of a cooler thing to do. And I know Carrie was super happy with it as well. So just very cool to end up here. Here we are. What is it? Over 10 years later, I guess.
Amazing. And yeah, the other flight/Carrie related story is that I Carrie and I went into business together, our first business, my wife, and I had joined EO, and I loved EO, and I was trying to get her to join EO. And for the longest time. And so she finally joins EO. And within like 2 months of joining EO, she had joined a forum with you. And she was like sending me pictures from the cockpit of your plane. And I'm like, and here she is with this handsome young guy on a plane. And I'm like, what did I do? What did I get her into? But it was all good. I know she had a great experience with you.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun trips. I used to fly a lot then, and I remember taking the forums out on fun flights to somewhere cool to do deep dives. But here we are, and I guess really curious. It's kind of cool for me to get to ask you questions I've never gotten to ask you before. So really wanted to start with when you were little, what did you dream you'd be when you grew up?
So first dream was first baseman for the New York Mets. I thought I was going to play baseball for the Mets. And it's interesting now as a father of a 9-year-old that plays baseball, because that's most definitely, he wants to pitch, but it's sort of very, very aligned with his dream. And then once I realized I was not going to play baseball for the New York Mets, my dream for a long time was to be a teacher. I thought I wanted to be a teacher from the time I was in 3rd grade all the way up to senior year of college. So it was definitely my plan for a while. And I did end up teaching for a few years at one point in my career. So I'm glad I did that. But obviously I've been able to pursue some other things along the way as well.
What was it about teaching specifically that kind of called to you?
Yeah. And the same thing continues to call to me, even if I'm not in a classroom teaching people, which is that the number one thing that I love to do is to inspire people and move people from one place to another. I thought I wanted to do that with elementary school kids, and I got a crack at it for a little while, but I continued to think about everything I do, whether it's as a parent or visiting my kids' classroom or managing hundreds of college kids now with my current company, Apprentice, or any of the other companies, or even my books, right? It's how can I impact people and help them get from one place to the next, help move them forward? That's what really, really drives me.
Where do you think that came from?
It's a good question. I don't know. If I want to speculate and go really deep, because the next meeting on my calendar is with my therapist, I might suggest that maybe I didn't feel like I had that as a kid. I grew up in a family with some really significant mental illness challenges, and I really did not have a mom or dad who was teaching me, like even like the little things like how to shave, or like the big things like planning your life. I felt I was really, really independent from a really young age, and in certain ways that served me. But I think in other ways that left me feeling really like lacking, and perhaps that caused in me a drive to wanna help others and inspire others and teach others in ways that maybe I didn't get as a kid so much.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing that, and that's great speculation. And I always find it interesting that some people end up giving themselves the thing that they never had as a child, and other people just become their parents straight out, right? They're just like, screw it, that's what I knew, that's what I'm going to do. But it does kind of tee up my next conversation, which is I'm at a place in my life where a lot's shifting. I'm also at a place in my business where a lot is shifting. And we just stepped through the 100-person size company, and delegation becomes a big topic. But I'm also curious how that shows up as a parent. And I imagine that, like, as you talk about what you didn't have from your parents, but who you are as a parent to your kids, who, again, I've watched their social, like, all the stuff you put on social media about them, they just seem like extraordinary kids. So I'm curious to know more about delegation and as it relates to trying to also invest in growing people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what, like, on the business side, scale is really all about, because we cannot scale ourselves ever. Like, it's not, I mean, I guess cloning might be possible at one point, but, not for a while. And so if we're building organizations, the only way to do it is to grow others, and to grow, first of all, to grow ourselves enough to be able to let go and get over the mindset issues that keep us from delegating, keep us from letting go, and then growing others. And then to the point of your question, families are different for sure, because, and my oldest daughter has reminded me that several times when I've tried to implement too much of a business style leadership approach to the family. But the families are different, but at the same time, it's less about scale, but certainly similarly about impact and teaching and inspiring and getting others to see their impact on the world. And I mean, this is a rich person problem, but it is a rich person problem that a lot of parents who have kids that grow up with money, like, don't necessarily teach them the things that they need to do to take care of themselves and to take care of the world. And a lot of kids that, that are privileged to grow up in EO, YPO type families aren't being taught in the same way. And so for me, it is really, really important to delegate. Okay. But that's the easy part, the chores, everyone has to do their role around the house. But even more important to teach the accountability and the work that needs to be done. We started with with the best date of my life. I will tell you, I hope she wasn't, well, it's fine for her to listen, even if I feel a little embarrassed by this, but my proudest moment ever as a parent, and one of the happiest / proudest moments of my entire life. And it's a little random, but it speaks to why, for me at least, parenting is so important and sort of the impact that we can have. So gratitude is one of my core values and principles that I live by. I'm a very, very big fan of the power of gratitude, the value of gratitude, the practice of gratitude. Every single day for the last 12 years in our family, at our family dinner, we close every single dinner going around the room and everyone sharing one person at the table they're grateful for and one person that's not at the table that they're grateful for. And my kids fought it in the very beginning, right? Being like, I don't know, 5 and 8 at the time, but they got used to it and became a practice. So now my oldest daughter is a junior at Boston University. She's away most of the time. We had a moment last year where she was visiting us, and sort of randomly, she shared that she does gratitude at the end of every meal with her friends at college. And like, she's taken the practice that we do as a family, and she brought that to all these other people. And I was just so moved and filled with pride. I mean, and it's funny because I said you don't necessarily scale in the same way with a family, but here's actually an interesting example of like, boy, my kid went from fighting this gratitude practice to learning it, to practicing it with us, to now bringing it to all these other individuals who might end up bringing it to their families. Like, that's an incredible impact that I can have as a parent over my child. And it's like, to me, it's like the most important stuff.
Well, that's a beautiful story. And I hope to carve that out as a practice to integrate into our family someday. Because I do find that so interesting. I get to fortunately sit with a lot of families, and I'm obviously very late on the kid game. So I get to see a lot of my friends with their children. Like, damn, there's a lot of great practices out there. And I do like that concept of, we don't even realize what could scale. Like, one moment of kindness could scale out to so many other people if it ends up being really important to them. So it's a beautiful frame. You also said something about mindset. You kind of started out there with the mindset of delegation. I'd love to start there because I imagine that, I've gone to all these conferences and showed my team all the tools, and I've learned all the tools at times, but I noticed that it is an emotional thing, or it is a mindset problem often. So I'd love to hear more about that, as it's kind of the edge I'm on right now.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's not about the tools. We know the tools, and if we don't know the tools, we can look up the tools online. It's like that information is easy to access. So, the book I wrote, the latest book I wrote, Get Over Yourself, is about delegation. The reason I wrote it is I built this company, Apprentice, which connects college students with entrepreneurs and business leaders. And I found that the biggest problem in my business wasn't finding and selling the entrepreneurs and business leaders. I built a team that got very good at that. The biggest problem wasn't finding the talent, the really smart, driven, ambitious college students. Built a team and did that. The biggest problem wasn't even doing the matching. We were really, really good at that. The biggest problem I had was once I connected the two, my clients to my talent, my clients sucked at delegating the work. They couldn't do it. They didn't do it. They didn't trust them, or they micromanaged, or they were all over the place. They were disorganized. They weren't meeting with them. I was like, it was so frustrating for me. And then I thought about all my kind of work in EO and all the EOers I knew and all the YPOers I knew. And I realized this delegation thing is a really big problem that a lot of people have. And the problem, again, Nick, isn't that people don't know the tools and systems. I mean, there are a lot of tools and systems out there. The problem is that we are stuck in our own heads and we can't get over ourselves. Specifically, we are afraid and we are distrustful. Those are the two big fears. Those are the two big mental roadblocks here. And to a lesser extent, the other two are control issues and perfectionism issues. So these four things: fear, distrust, need to control, and need for things to be perfect. These are the things that get in the way of becoming good leaders and good delegators. And I just saw that. I've seen that so many times. And so my hope with this current book and with my speaking around it and my work around it is to help people break through, come to terms with their fears and their trust issues and their control issues and their perfectionism issues, which, when I mention it, invariably people are like, yep, that one's me, or that one's me, or 3 out of 4 are me. Like, I'll do these, I'll do a speaking gig and I'll be like, how many of you feel like you have issues with fear, trust, control, perfectionism, right? The good news, bad news is it affects a lot of us, right? And it's, since the tools are figure-outable, once we work on the mindset stuff and can have those breakthroughs and can get over ourselves and deal with those issues, we can figure out which tool system to use, et cetera.
Which one was the hardest for you of those 4?
I would say fear, and with perfectionism being a close second. And if I define success as perfection, then my fear of my fear of failure becomes essentially a fear of anything less than perfection, which is, that's a hard thing to live with, right? It's like, if I'm not going to be happy with anything less than perfection, and perfection is pretty much impossible because it's a construct, well, then I'm basically setting myself up to not be happy ever and to be living in fear constantly. That's like not a good way to live. So, I mean, like all this stuff, I think the real work is in the self-identification of it, right? So like, now that I can say that out loud and understand how sort of ridiculous it is, irrational it is, etc., and like be like, okay, I get it. Somewhere in my head, I think I need to be perfect, and somewhere in my head, I think that I'm afraid that if I'm not perfect and if I fail, then I'm going to feel worthless, and I can keep doing the ifs and the narrative that I might tell myself at some level. And once I'm aware of all of that, I can kind of work on letting it go and like getting shit moving.
You obviously nailed it. You know, even for me, I'm sure everyone kind of fits into this somewhere with these four, but the perfectionism is huge. Control is a monster for me because it's almost like this idea that if I'm not actively managing stuff, it's almost like the world was out to screw me, right? If I'm not the one handling it, it's going to find an in and just crush everything I was trying to do, which is an insane thought. Instead of like, well, what if I wasn't doing it? It all just kind of worked itself out. I've never had that thought for most of my life. And obviously there's just a tons of fear. You kind of hit on also unworthiness. There's a part of me that's like, I feel weird that it's hierarchical sometimes, that I get to tell other people what to do. And I'm like, am I worthy of being able to be that person that directs other people to do the things I want done? There's a lot of that stuff in there. And like, what is the advice? Since it's, I mean, this is such a, overcoming these like emotional blocks and people's, you know, who knows, it's their upbringing, their trauma, their all types of conditioning. How do you recommend people overcome it?
It's really, really hard. I mean, it's easy to say with an organization of 100 people that, okay, I realize at some level I cannot control these outcomes. I just can't. It's harder when you're a solopreneur, when you have a team of 3 or 5, because I think people convince themselves that somehow they can control everything. And that's just control as an example. I mean, these are all really powerful, to your point, usually like, you know, originating in childhood things. And I have a psych undergraduate degree, but I'm not an expert by any means when I answer this question. But I would just say, you know, for me, the biggest solution has been, and so therefore what I preach to an extent is really that constant work on self-awareness and self-improvement. And I'm still afraid of failure. I'm still afraid of not being good enough. I'm still afraid of not being perfect. I'm still afraid of screwing up. I'm still afraid right now that I won't be worthy on your podcast and that I'll suck and I won't deliver enough value. Okay, but if I'm so aware of those feelings, then it allows me to have courage. Courage is the key thing for me. Courage is just, all courage is the definition, by definition, is acting in the face of fear. So if I can feel all those fears, I'll tell you a word I hate. And so as much as I love the word courage, I hate the word fearless. It's not realistic. We're fearless. How could you be fearless? I can't be fearless. I'm freaking afraid all the time. And that's okay. It's okay. As long as I work on the self-awareness of my issues and the improvement and the courage to tackle them face on, the vulnerability, then I know I'm going to grow. And yeah, am I going to fail along the way? Of course. That's life. Am I going to be able to control things? Completely no. I can control my own actions though. And I can control my own words. That I can control. And so those are the I would say those things, self-awareness and self-improvement. And then the third thing I would say that I've given a shout out to in my recent, at least in Get Over Yourself, maybe in the last 2 books, depends on the timing. Now that I'm old, I don't remember everything. But I certainly, that I do give a lot of credit to. I don't know if you're familiar, Nick, with Shirzad Chamine and positive intelligence movement, but You should have him on your podcast. I'll make an intro. And PQ has been revolutionary for me. PQ is the idea of developing greater intelligence there's traditional sort of cognitive intelligence. That's the first thing we think of with intelligence. And then there's emotional intelligence, which a lot of people have studied and practiced and gotten better at. And positive intelligence is basically the intelligence of mindset and being able to see everything that comes our way, as hard as it is, as a gift or opportunity. That's hard, but that's the work, and that's the intelligence, and that's the and so when I fail, my goal for Get Over Yourself was being top 1,000 on Amazon on the first day. I didn't get in the top. There's 2 million books on Amazon. I wanted to be in the top 1,000. Okay, I got in the top 5,000. I immediately felt like a total failure. And then I thought about it for a minute and like reframed it for a minute in my head. And I said, first of all, rationally, the top 5,000 out of 2 million books is an enormous, incredible success beyond almost anyone's dreams. That's rationally. But second, how can I use how I'm feeling right now? How can I use this result to move myself forward, to learn from it, to see it as a gift, to see it as an opportunity in the future? And if I can do that, then it's great. Then it's a win. Then it's not a loss. Then it's not a failure anymore. It's a win. That's what that sort of mindset intelligence or positive intelligence is about.
That's really cool. I mean, I definitely love the intro. I love the concept specifically because I've been reading, I don't know if you're familiar with Napoleon Hill wrote a book called Outwitting the Devil, I believe is what it's called. And in the book,
Hill, but more from his more famous book. But yeah, that's
yeah. So it's kind of his like almost unknown book that was hidden away for 80 years because the family was afraid to release it. And one of the things they talk about there, with every failure, there's an equivalent advantage if you look hard enough. Right? It's like if you really take the time and you figure the biggest hit is also the biggest slingshot. If you can find that opposing force, right? Because every force has an opposite and equal action, whatever I'm screwing up physics, I'm sure. But there is something really beautiful about that. I did not know that there is a area of study that really brings that to the forefront, allows you to think about it in that way. So I'd be very curious to learn more about that.
It's phenomenal stuff. The biggest example I can use, and this is insane to even think about really, but he interviews Christopher Reeve, Superman, and he asked him for the best thing that ever happened to him. He said the best thing that ever happened to him was getting paralyzed because it gave him a life of meaning and purpose for the rest of his life. He worked on helping advocate for people with disabilities. Can you imagine having the mindset to be able to see that as a gift instead of being angry and resentful for the rest of your life like most of us would be? I mean, I think that is just an incredible testament to the power of mindset and positive intelligence. So sorry I interrupted you, but I wanted to share.
No, it's fine. I hear those stories and I'm so happy that they exist that I'm still talking about fear. I'm like, I hope that's not a lesson I need to learn in this lifetime, right? I mean, all of us learn through pain and loss and suffering, some more than others, right? And, you just hope that it's like, or whatever does come my way, I hope that I can have that mindset when the moment comes to go. The suffering will be shortened by the fact that I could get my way to this is meaningful, like very Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, all that kind of stuff. But man, you hear those stories and you're like, I don't want that lesson.
Indeed. On a much lighter note, you mentioned Napoleon Hill's hidden book. Here's my version. Okay, I wrote this book called Likeable Business that no one has read. It's my best reviewed book. So objectively speaking, it's my best book, Nick. But when I tell you that no one's read it, I mean, no one's read this book. It's almost hard to find now. And the reason that no one's bought this book is I learned the hard way that literally everyone judges a book by its cover and its title, and it's a really crappy cover and title. And I've been fighting with the publisher for years to try to change it, but they won't do it anymore. So I'm screwed. But anyway, there are hidden books out there like Napoleon Hill's and Likeable Business that are worth reading.
What's one of the golden nuggets in that book for you?
It's about leadership, and it's I would say the biggest nugget in there is authentic, vulnerable leadership and the power of vulnerability. I talked about a management team meeting at Likeable where basically we had like some serious sharing, like EO, YPO style sharing, and I cried and in front of my whole leadership team. And it led to like basically everyone being really deep. And by the end of this meeting, these executives feeling the kind of closeness and connections that EO and YBO forums feel, and how that allowed me to move forward in the business because I had leaders that were so committed to each other and so real with each other. I don't think that happens a lot in the corporate world. And, you know, we were brave enough to go there, and for us at least, the outcomes were just absolutely remarkable.
If you had to verbalize the fear of, like, if someone said to you before that moment, hey, I want you to go cry in front of your leadership team, what would have the fear said about not doing that? Like, what would the reason why not to do it?
Why not to do it? I mean, Oh my God, I would look weak. I would be laughed at. I would feel humiliated. I wouldn't look like a strong leader. I wouldn't look like I knew what was needed. I would look and feel super weak. I mean, there's a lot of fears around there, and I think, you know, if I this is a bit of a digression, but society really teaches males more than anyone from a very, very young age. We talked about parenting earlier. When a kid is crying, you know what the words out of every parent and teacher are typically? Don't cry. We literally tell people not to cry. Instead of saying, what's the matter? I hear you. You know, like all the validation and mirroring stuff that we learn as, you know, in EO and YBO, we do the opposite of that when it comes to kids around crying, and certainly boys and certainly men. So, you know, I think a lot of leaders, and especially male leaders, feel totally afraid of being vulnerable and seen as weak, et cetera. And I certainly had a lot of that. Fortunately, again, I had, I guess, enough courage to just go for it. So
I don't know if I've ever cried in front of my team. I got pretty close a few times, but I had a lot of those same fears. And I want to draw that connection back, because it sounds like to be able to truly delegate, I imagine that there is a lot of vulnerability in it. And you talked about that courage and the fearlessness, which I love that you brought that up too, because there's so many people in like the old concept of what a leader is like, yeah, fear is not present. So then I always felt like an imposter. I'm like, I can do the courageous thing, but the fear is there. So does anyone else see that in me? Because that sucks. I'm so afraid of being naked in front of everybody.
Right. And that's very, very powerful. And so this idea that we teach a lot of, you know, be strong, be fearless, look like you know what's going on, okay, that has real adverse effects. Okay, it might work for a little while, but what are the effects on us as leaders? And what are the ultimate effects on our team when they can't trust us because we're full of shit, because we're pretending to be someone we're not? And so the approach that I've taken, for better or for worse, but again, I've had pretty good outcomes along the way, has been, you know, let me share. Okay, I don't know if this is right, but I think this is right, and we're gonna go for it. And I'm scared we're screwing this thing up. I'm scared we're not gonna. I mean, there's radical extremes that I wouldn't necessarily go to, like when I was scared of not making payroll early on. Like, I didn't necessarily want my team to know that I was scared of not making payroll, but certainly to the extent that we can be, that I can be vulnerable. The ironic thing is that vulnerability breeds trust, and trust, as we mentioned before, is what's so important. So if I'm going to trust, I need people to trust has to go both ways. And if people are going to trust me, they need to know that, you know, I am who I'm real. And that includes the warts and the fears and the vulnerability. And that's really hard stuff, but I suspect that that's why the book has done so well in the reviews of the 76 people that have actually read it in the world, because I think that resonates with people. I think at some level we all want to be totally authentic and vulnerable, but of course, again, fear and what we believe society has taught us are the norms keep us from doing that.
So I'm curious to know more about. There's a line here, and again, I imagine, like, when I'm flying an airplane, when I had you in the airplane, the last thing you want me to do is turn to you and go, I'm actually really afraid right now that this isn't going to go well on this flight, right? Like, the act of compassion that I'm giving you is to hold the container of confidence, right? Even if I am afraid. I'm wondering for you, where is that line where you decide, like, I get the payroll one, right? Like, this may scare the shit out of everybody that they're not going to get paid. I think I can do this, but I'm just not sure I want to put that burden on everyone else. How do you draw that line? How do you know when to be the facade and when to be that open person?
Yeah, I don't think it's as binary as you're suggesting, because I think that the airplane as an example is an extreme one, so it's hard for me to argue with you on that. I don't think I would ever want you saying I'm afraid right now, but I think in most examples that aren't like life altering situations, it can work as long as we are honest and as long as we aren't paralyzed by our fear, but we have both fear and courage at the same time. I'll give you a recent example. I'm thinking as to whether there are ramifications. I don't think so. I'm just being honest. So I'm the chairman of a media company, a small media company that serves nurses, and it's been a great experience for me to move from a CEO type to a chairman of a board, governing, overseeing CEO and managing the CEO and our investors, and it's different work. And we've had some cash flow issues. And so to direct to the point of what you said, I have shared with her, my CEO, I'm afraid that we could have some challenges here. That's really hard. I am also confident of two things. One, we're going to give it our best effort. And that's all, that's all I can do. That's all we can do. We're going to give it our best effort. But two, unlike the situation in the plane where it's like an actual life or death situation, like at the end of the day, if we fail, like that would suck. It would suck for us. It would suck for our staff. It would suck for our investors. But like, we'd move on and we'd all be okay. Everyone. People don't invest in a company with their entire life savings. And if they do, they're foolish. And that was a lesson I learned with my first failed company. Because by the way, very fortunate to have that 8-figure exit, fortunate to have some 7-figure companies in there. But, I've started a bunch of companies that have not succeeded, Nick. And the first one that I raised venture capital for, I was terrified of failing my investors and feeling like, I was letting them down and losing their money. And as the shit hit the fan, it was really, really hard to have some of those conversations. But I didn't lose friends. Some of them have invested in me since. And some of them said, one guy who actually put the most money in, and he lost a lot of money. In my view, I mean, $800,000, I think that's a lot of money to lose on a bet, on a company, right? And he said to me, and when I was saying, this is not going to fly, I'm so sorry. He said, obviously I'm upset, but I really appreciate your transparency all along the way. You told me where you were at. You told me what you needed. You told me what your fears were. You told me what you thought you could do. I was really transparent, and that made it so much easier than I feared it would be at the end. So I think unless it's a life or death situation, to answer your question directly, Nick, I would always err on the side of being transparent, as long as I am also not curling up in a fetal position and saying, this is over, but saying, okay, I'm afraid. Here's why I have some confidence and some courage here, and what I need from you. So I think that's a totally reasonable approach to take that folks appreciate. They're going to respond because, and they have responded in the past, because it just feels real, versus that sort of archetype that you mentioned earlier of the, no fear, command and control, we got this, everything's great kind of leader, that it just doesn't feel real. And so trust isn't necessarily built. And then it's not, I don't think you get the same outcome.
Yeah, and I'd actually love to make an attempt to draw it back to delegation, because I'm curious if one of the failure points I've had in the past is I've tried to get people to do stuff by just giving them tasks, right? Hey, do A, then B, then C. And if anything changed, the whole system fell apart, because it was just more like follow my direction, versus I wonder if having the courage for people to really see my perspective, to really be in my shoes, to understand vulnerably where I'm coming from, that would actually empower them to really handle those things and some of the uncertainty that might come along that might try to knock it off the rails. And so I am curious if that vulnerability and courage do set up for better delegation ultimately.
They do. And I would just, yes, and it's the courage to delegate outcomes instead of tasks. Because when I give my marketing director, the desired outcome, and I say, you're empowered. Here's how I would get there. You don't have to get there that way. You don't have to do X, Y, Z. I don't care what you do. I don't care how much time it takes you. I don't care when you work, where you work, the team you build. Here's your total budget. Here's my desired outcome. And I'm going to check in with you along the way and be there to support you, not to manage you, to coach you and support you. That, to me, takes a lot of courage. And that's, I guess, my model for delegate. That has been, and that's what I write about, right? That's my model for delegating better. So there's vulnerability. The real place where there's kind of courage and need to surrender some control is over the directions, right? Because the thing is, most of us have worked for somebody at one point or another. And so most of us have had an experience of having a bad manager, a bad boss that does tell us exactly how things need to be done. And if things differ at all, that's not okay. So what I like to do is try to remind people of that and channel that and remember how I felt when I was on the other end of that and how controlled and miserable I felt to have a boss like that. I'm not naming names, but let's call this person Scott. When Scott was managing me like that, I didn't want to work for him. I didn't want to do the work. I didn't feel motivated. I didn't feel excited. I felt controlled and miserable. So, but when I've been fortunate to have folks give me the prescription and the guidance, the what the finish line looked like, I wanted to run through a wall for them, and I felt empowered. So that's the work here. I believe, Nick, is around. Well, first of all, let go of 100% of the outcome. We don't need 100. So the finish line is maybe 80% or 75%. We have to define that for ourselves. But that's where the perfection comes in. So defining an outcome, letting go of the need to get to perfection, and maybe being okay with 80%, and then letting go of the 15-step process that we developed because we thought it was the best way to do it, and letting them develop their own process, which more likely than not ends up being a lot better, by the way, than our process and the way we think is right. Like when I'm coaching somebody on how to delegate better, I ask them, so let me understand something. Are you the best person on the planet for this particular task or project? Like, of the 6 billion people, like you're the best at it, and why? And people are like, no, of course not. I'm just the only guy here. Well, let's find another guy or gal that's better than you at it, because there's probably, of the 6 billion people, probably a lot of people that are better than you at it, right? It's really narcissistic of us to think that we could be the best person at anything. We're not. There's better people that we could delegate to and empower. Sorry, I'm rambling now.
No, that's great. I'm also taking some notes because I'm like, this is a little too real for me. But before we kind of bring it to a close, I am curious to know, again, you've had incredible successes. I mean, again, it sounds like you have kids that you're super proud of, and you've had the exit that I know so many people hold as like the gold cup that they're after. And you've New York Times, speaking on stage, you've kind of done so many of the things that I think people hold as what success would look like. What's your dream beyond?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, just to be super vulnerable, Nick, I'm struggling right now. I'm trying to figure out what would really move the needle for me. Man, I thought about public office. I ran for New York City Council some years ago. And I've thought about, do I run for senator, something like that? It's, politics, of course, are so freaking, I mean, that's a whole other podcast, but so broken, and so government is so challenging. But that might be the answer. Just maybe investing and mentoring and more folks with our exit. Carrie and I started a fund to invest in women and people of color owned businesses, and that's been really fulfilling for me. Building Apprentice, our current company, to the place where I can leave it in great hands with my daughter. I think that would be a wonderful, wonderful dream beyond. And just living a life filled with gratitude and filled with meaningful interactions with people, whether it's one-on-one with my kids or one-to-many with my podcasts and speaking and whatnot, meaningful interactions where I can, go back to that initial dream of being a teacher and just scale that to the extent, possible. The more people that I can impact and help in this world, the better I'll feel about, the legacy that I will have left.
I appreciate those answers. And, sometimes I hear someone as an exit, and I'm like, oh, that person's screwed. They don't yet have the capacity to even know what to do with that much energy. But it's great to hear your thoughtfulness and your vulnerability. And I'm glad to hear that when someone's bestowed with that much benefit and opportunity, that, you're finding ways to really help others and teach and empower others that maybe didn't have a voice or have the access to it.
Yeah. Thank you. I think I have one more book left in me as well. And I'm still in the throes of promotion with this new one. So I don't want to think about it for a couple of years, but I think my final book will be something around health and wealth and the interaction between our focus on our personal health and our family's health and our ability to create wealth, both monetary wealth and wealth in every sense of the word. I think there's something there that I'd like to put in print for folks, but again, probably a few years off. But since you asked about the dream beyond, I thought I would share.
Fantastic. Well, let me do a quick recap because there's a lot of stuff in here that I'd love to follow up on, but just wanted to point out again that letting go of the 100% of the outcome, I think that's a really important belief system that I think all of us would benefit from. Just saying 80% is good enough. Focusing on, instead of learning more skills and tools for effective delegation, starting with the mindset and figuring out what is it about me, what emotions are preventing me from really fully trusting my team or handing something off to someone else. The courage to bring that vulnerability to our teams and lean into the fear and say, yeah, it is scary to share that vulnerability, to cry, to show the fear in front of our teams, but do it anyway. And I love what you said about delegating outcomes, because even now I'm like, damn it, I do delegate tasks, don't I? Shit. So really trusting and taking the time. It feels lazy to delegate tasks. I know that's the easy thing to do. Taking the time, putting the effort in to say, what do I really want? Which also is a whole other topic. I find it so hard to communicate what I actually want. And so I dump tasks onto someone else and I'm pissed off when it doesn't happen, when I didn't even know what I wanted in the first place.
Right.
So I think that's brilliant. And again, if you're as moved by what Dave shared, again, I mean, Dave, you've always just been an incredible resource in my life, and all the interaction we've had has always been so pleasant. He's an amazing speaker. So if you have an event that you think you'd benefit from having him speak at, go check him out on his website, davekerpen.com. Also, if you're more interested in delegation, which, I mean, talk about getting leverage and finding ways to have more effect in the world, go check out his latest book, again, Get Over Yourself. And I'm going to try really hard to get over myself. I don't know how good I'll do at it. But thank you as always for being here. And I hope everyone enjoyed this as much as I did.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Dave. Absolutely.